So a little bit about what this is. What have you guys attended tonight? What is the purpose? So this is going to be a monthly meetup. It'll probably be the first, I think we said first Tuesday of every month is the idea behind this. And obviously it's coming through that meetup platform that you guys all registered through. And this is as per Hack the Box asked us to do it. So this is obviously also our first session. So we are going to have some kinks along the way, and we are going to need you guys to give us feedback and tell us what worked, what didn't. And obviously the more feedback we get, the better this will be for all of you. But the idea of these is to kind of bridge the barrier to entry that comes with, cybersecurity or Hack the Box platform. So it's going to be like an intro for beginners, as well as we start to progress, tips for experts. And I'm sure there's something for everyone to learn at some point here. And also test for veterans. We are going to be bringing in a couple of tougher rooms and stuff like that, which should, they've retired boxes, but they definitely should test your capabilities. And then once this whole lovely story of COVID kind of subsides, the idea is to go IRL, to go in real life with these meetings. Hack the Box graciously offered to pay for pizza for everyone when we start breaking up into the real life. Obviously, the difficulty comes in with South Africa being a large country. So what we'll probably do is Carl will host the Cape Town one. I'm from Johannesburg. I'll host the Johannesburg one. And depending on who's speaking, we'll be listening in through video conferencing as we're doing now through Zoom, and the other one will be live. But there'll be pizza for everyone if Hack the Box provide. But that is the idea to eventually go. So this can be strong for networking and meeting new people, and just having a beer on a warm afternoon or something in the future. The usual formats for these will be about an hour presentation, probably not the full hour. We don't want to bore you guys to death. We want to do PowerPoints. The idea of this is to be a practical session, but these hour presentations will definitely be to help upskill you and provide, some tools, some crazy exploits that are seen, something happening that's new, whatever. And then we'll break into 2-hour lab times kind of after that, where we'll be focusing on a particular box, something that you guys would have voted on. We'll focus on that box and kind of walk everybody through that and have them all, at least get to the finish line in the 2 hours. But there'll also be a couple of extra boxes for those that have done the room or who have finished early and want to try something else. Along there, there'll also be, in the Discord, the idea is to use the Discord. There'll be lots of people who will know what's going on and who'll be willing to help you, and not necessarily even for the boxes that we're doing. If you are stuck on another box that isn't in the roster that we're doing tonight, then ask away, and I'm sure people are willing to help. What are proceedings for tonight? So the idea was obviously open the meeting room and present now. It's going to be a bit of a shorter presentation today, just because, again, I want to walk you through the UI of Hack the Box for those who've never seen it before, explain the scoring system. It's a little bit confusing. Explain the different, what the difference between a machine and a challenge is and how those will contribute towards your points, as well as then to break into the practical session with enough time to set up VMs for those that haven't done it and still go through the box that we're doing today. And then the last half an hour, I'd like to maybe have a little bit of a feedback session, not hard and fast, and also at all times just actually send feedback to myself, Carl, who's Spy Monkey on the Discord, and me, who's Toke on the Discord. Just message us at any point if you see something that would improve. If it's fresh in your mind, just send it. Yeah. Cool. So that's the order of proceedings for tonight. So I think we are ready to get into the talk. And I wonder if that's sent a shiver down anyone's spine. WannaCry, a very formidable piece of malware that we've seen. So the kind of contents for my talk tonight is going to be, of course, what is WannaCry? What it was and the impact then, so we can kind of see, the widespread effects that WannaCry had. The NSA, no spoilers, we'll save that for when we get into the slides. WannaCry's components, all the sort of different pieces of exploits that rolled in together to create this WannaCry piece of malware. And then break it down step by step. So what happens when your computer gets infected, how it kind of traverses through, what it does, what it's looking to do, until the point where it encrypts everything. How it was stopped. This is kind of what makes this WannaCry unique. Despite the actual exploit components of it, there was a certain feature that allowed it to be stopped, which was super unique and something that we'll definitely break down. And finally, a bit of mitigation. Won't be very long. The mitigation is it's an older piece of malware, so not much to say there. But first, why am I even talking about WannaCry? Well, it was fairly recent when it comes to major pieces of malware that we observed. This happened in 2017, so not too long ago. And I'm sure many people here had sleepless nights working on patching, fixing, or hopefully no one actually got affected by it. But it had a very unique wormable portion to it, which is something that we'll also speak about. The NSA were involved somehow. Again, no spoilers. We'll save that when we get there. And then finally, that's the box we're going to focus on. After talking about WannaCry, we're going to go show you how easy it is to actually exploit this, because it is incredibly easy. And you can see why it was probably so formidable based on how easy it was to exploit. So what is WannaCry? WannaCry was a global cyber attack, bit of a pandemic, if you will, that happened in May 2017. And it caught a lot of companies off guard. A lot of companies had no idea. They were not ready for it. They were caught with their pants down. And yeah, it cost them massive financial issues. WannaCry was a Windows-based attack. Technically, it was looking for SMB, but this is like a mostly used by Windows operating systems. And the suspects, the perpetrators, were actually never found. No one's got a pinned against WannaCry at the moment, so no one actually knows. But in 2017, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia all formally asserted that North Korea was behind this attack. Probably because there were two loose connections to a hacking group called Lazarus, and they've got strong links to North Korea. But again, no one's actually been accused of this. So this is the dreaded wallpaper. What happens when this crypto ransomware attacks you? Obviously, what crypto ransomware is it attacks your valuable files, encrypts them, and then asks for a sum in return for a decryption key. It demands a ransom. But this is the picture that it would then change your desktop background to, in order to inform you, oh no, oops, your important files are encrypted. And this would make you aware that something has gone terribly wrong. On top of this horrific wallpaper, there was also this that kept popping up. And you could close it as much as you wanted, but it would just keep popping up. And this was kind of the crux of explaining, what's happened to your computer. You can see it gave you all the information you need. What happened to my computer? Can I recover my files? How do I pay? As well as the wallets, and what is Bitcoin? As well as these two unique boxes on the left, it would basically count you down in order to put a bit of pressure on you that the payment would be raised in 3 days since original infection. And then it would threaten that after 7 days, your computer would lose all the files. So a little bit scary. So I thought it'd be nice if we could understand the 3 different components that WannaCry was built up. There was 3 portions of it that in totality created this WannaCry malware. The first portion of it was obviously the ransomware, the bit that everyone seems to know about. Then there was the worm. The worm was called Eternal Blue. That's the name of the exploit. And obviously the worm is how it will then spread from computer to computer. And then there was the backdoor. The double Pulsar was the name of that exploit. And that was sort of the loading dock. It would then load ransomware in through. Moving into the impact, just briefly to understand a bit of the damage so you can kind of get a scale of, how effective WannaCry was and ultimately the worm portion, because that's how it spreads. Europol claimed that this campaign was unprecedented in scale, with estimates of about 230,000 computers in a single day over 150 countries. A single day, 230,000. This kind of scale obviously comes with large financial implications, with estimates of about $4 billion in losses around the globe. And as you can see, some very large companies were affected. Indian police had branches go down, police stations. There was the Chinese police, FedEx, NHS, Renault, Nissan. Even the US Department of Homeland Security had a couple machines get affected. But luckily they were able to contain quite quickly. I'd like to speak a bit more about the impact and specifically on the NHS. So the NHS is the UK National Health Service, and it was probably notably hit the hardest. The hack caused 19,000 appointments to be cancelled and cost the NHS an estimated 20 million in the first week, pounds, and a further estimated 80 million after that first week. The NHS experienced far greater challenges, though, than financial, as ambulances were rerouted to other hospitals. Practices experienced delays in urgent test results, or even in certain cases, they had to divert emergency room patients to other hospitals. Leo Scanlon, former deputy CISO of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, even took the leap to say that cyber exploitations is killing people. The exploitation of cybersecurity vulnerabilities is killing people. Cool, so who's to blame for these exploits? Which is quite a big question. So who is to blame for these exploits? Well, here comes the NSA, right? So this is your national security agency in America, and ultimately they were to blame for these exploits. They discovered multiple Windows vulnerabilities and chose not to responsibly disclose them. Instead went and developed exploit code, which is highly irresponsible. However, they developed tons of exploit codes for it, and the only two that we're going to focus on today is going to be Double Pulsar and Eternal Blue. Double Pulsar is an implant that enables execution of additional malicious code, and Eternal Blue is an exploit that allows remote code execution through SMB. Double Pulsar is commonly delivered through Eternal Blue. So you can see it saying, you know, thanks for delivering me, and this is the exploit that was used to deliver Double Pulsar. So we continue the story with the NSA having now developed exploit code, and we fast forward to April the 8th, 2017. A hacking group called Shadow Brokers were able to hack the NSA, and the NSA suffered the largest data breach in their history at that point. Including this was the Eternal Blue exploit code and Double Pulsar exploit code. And as you can see over here, the diary is kind of saying, this is the NSA operator saying, we got hacked today by the shadow brokers. Hopefully no one will do anything with these tools. And then 13 days later, he writes that they've observed tens of thousands of Double Pulsar backdoors already in the wild 13 days later. At this point, luckily, there was no malware that was utilizing these backdoors. And then less than a month later, of course, WannaCry decided to utilize that. Notably though, Microsoft released a patch for Eternal Blue 2 months prior to this data breach. So this timeline kind of suggests that Microsoft were tipped off by the NSA about the data breach. And they did later publicly slam the US government for having not released this information sooner. Interestingly, Avast still, with all these patches and available updates, still put the number of vulnerable machines in the millions. So it's still prevalent, it's still out there, and people just need to patch their machines, right? Cool, so in order to kind of understand Eternal Blue, I have to quickly break down what SMB is to those who aren't aware, because Eternal Blue exists in Windows implementation of SMB version 1. So just quickly, SMB, server message block, is a communication protocol that allows communication with remote computers and servers. The intention is to use resources, shared resources, so you can open, edit files on that network. As you can see, you've got two machines who are kind of working on the same document, a bit of collaboration. And this is ultimately the vulnerability that allowed WannaCry to become wormable through SMB. So now we're going to talk about Eternal Blue. 3 former NSA operators who spoke on the condition of remaining anonymous said that they were tasked with finding a Microsoft vulnerability, and they spent over a year looking for Microsoft vulnerabilities. After, of course, they found this vulnerability, it was named in-house Eternal Blue Screen because unfortunately, it was often, as we'll find out tonight, I'm sure we'll see that it does often cause blue screens on servers, and that's kind of a risk that tips off the target that they, being hacked. However, after, a little bit of time, the NSA were able to make the tool a lot more reliable, and then they used it in countless intelligence missions and counterterrorism missions. So these former NSA employees said that the agency never seriously considered alerting Microsoft about the vulnerability and held onto it for more than 5 years before obviously the breach forced their hand. So they were actively exploiting Eternal Blue for more than 5 years, and they've even considered letting Microsoft know. So Eternal Blue is probably most famous for spreading WannaCry and PETA ransomware, but as we'll demonstrate later, you can actually use it for any exploit because it gives you remote code execution on a machine. Cool, next component that we'll speak about is double pulsar, the backdoor. Double pulsar is a very sophisticated multi-architecture based kernel payload that hooks onto 32 and 64-bit systems and allows our attacker to execute any command. Because it's a kernel payload, whatever executes will be executing in context of admin, full system access. It utilizes port 445, which is the SMB port already, so that's convenient for it. Also makes it probably a little bit tougher to detect. But if you do detect it, it doesn't necessarily mean you're infected because of double pulsar is just a loading dock from which other malware can be given to the computer. So double pulsar doesn't mean that you have malware on it, but you're primed and ready for malware to be sent to you. Cool, so now we have this wormable RCE with Eternal Blue and a backdoor through double pulsar, thanks to the NSA, unfortunately. We need a payload, and in comes ransomware. Ransomware was the payload that WannaCry used, of course. So looking at the ransomware components, it will target your most valuable files and begin encrypting. However, it doesn't attack files that your computer needs in a core level. So what this means is once you've been attacked with ransomware, only your data, your information is what's encrypted, but you can still use your computer as much as you want. This is to avoid, bricking your computer, making it difficult for you to pay. They'd rather just encrypt your valuable files and then have you use your computer as per normal in order to buy Bitcoin and send it to them. Awesome, so we spoke about the three components that WannaCry was built up with. Double pulsar, the backdoor through which the ransomware was loaded, and Eternal Blue through which it propagated and of course would then also load double pulsar with. So you had Eternal Blue, which would then be an RCE to give you double pulsar, and then double pulsar, which would then load the ransomware. So the authors, they weren't particularly interested in thwarting analysis. The samples analyzed in a lot of cases contained little obfuscation, if any, and no anti-debugging code or VM-aware code, which kind of makes it very easy to reverse engineer. You could deploy it in a simple VM and open it up with a simple reverse engineer tool and start trying to figure out how it works. For the sake of time today, I'm not doing a live decompile and a live reverse engineer as we kind of walk through. Instead, I'm just going to go through the kind of steps that you would see it doing on your computer, or obviously you wouldn't see, but it would be doing. Interesting enough, to those who know, this is actually Ghidra, or Ghidra, which is a very common reverse engineer tool, also given to us by the NSA, but this time they gave it to us publicly instead of through a data breach on their side. So WannaCry's first step is an initial beacon. The very first thing once your computer gets hit with the dropper is it makes a request to this long random URL, this gibberish. And what it's doing there is it's checking for a response, an active connection back. So if the payload would obviously hit your machine, make the request out, and got a response back, the domain was active, this inadvertently became a kill switch. So then the malware would exit and would not deploy. However, if it didn't get a response, it would then continue on as per usual. So it sends a response out, to this URL. The URL isn't registered, got no response. It says, okay, cool, we're ready for the next step. So next step is actually propagation. So this is before it even does any ransomware attack or on your computer. The first thing it wants to do, apart from the initial beacon, is to start propagating, to start sending itself to other computers in your network and weirdly externally. So how it begins propagation is through Eternal Blue. Obviously, we spoke about Eternal Blue being the wormable portion of it. So this propagation relies on two process threads. The first thread determines the local subnet range, your subnet, and then starts scanning 10 local IPs at a time. 10 concurrent IPs probably to reduce the risk of detection. And then the second thread was actually random external IP addresses. So it would start probing out to random external IP addresses to see if there was double pulsar already loaded. Because as you saw, the NSA saw tens of thousands within the first week, and this was before. So bear in mind, it already has double pulsar on the machine. It doesn't need to exploit your machine. It will just drop the ransomware on instead. So it starts looking at random IP addresses out on the internet. Do you have double pulsar loaded? No. Okay, cool. Eternal Blue comes in, exploits your machine, and then drops double pulsar, and then the ransomware. So after its scans, looking for propagation, it will then obviously begin the propagation, which it will then check if you've got double pulsar. If not, hit you with Eternal Blue and try and exploit your machine. And if at any point it gets a 0x51 in the response data, that means that the exploitation was successful and it can deliver double pulsar. So the SMB portion of the worm now delivers itself to the compromised system as a DLL file. And then the DLL is executed with a single exported function named play game. It writes a copy of the original SMB worm to this address at the top here. So it copies the worm portion of it to a different part and then executes it, of course, because propagation was step one. On your new machine that is now targeted, it's exploited, it would copy it and propagate from that machine on and on and on. And then secondly, it would drop this other exe called task SCHE, which was actually the ransomware portion. So on your infected machine, you've been hit by another machine, got infected on your network. Now you're being hit by that machine. You would get these two. You get a worm portion of it and the ransomware portion. And as you can see here, this kind of resting thing here is to demonstrate Eternal Blue, hits the machine, and then double pulsar comes in as a loading dock. So now we're going to talk about the ransomware portion. We've heard about how it propagates through the network, how it attacks, double pulsar, Eternal Blue, thanks to the NSA. So let's speak a bit about the ransomware portion. You're going to get a zip archive on your computer, which it then extracts with a hard-coded password, as you can see on the left there, WannaCry at 2017. So, I mean, even malware developers aren't even using strong passwords. What can you do? And then it takes out, or it will extracts all these files. And most notably, you've kind of got your desktop picture that we saw, that black oops, your important files are encrypted, as well as the WannaDecryptor, which was that red box explaining everything. It also had an RDP session, bit of a payload there that would then ensure if you RDP'd into the machine, you could see the WannaDecryptor at all times. It then also had the ransomware encryption stuff, RTF rich text formats that were multiple different languages. So that red box that we saw in the beginning can be translated to any language. If you were Arabic, Chinese, French, Spanish, whatever, it had all the languages. And then it also have another zip inside of it that would get extracted that had a copy of Tor browser. Obviously, that it's used for command and control, CNC connections. We'll speak about that a little bit later. And then ransomware demand text, obviously telling you how much they want and where to pay. So now it begins encrypting, right? So you've got your super important work file, and it starts looking a bit more like this, unreadable. It starts, encrypting and giving your computer the worst day it's kind of ever had. And once encryption is done, you'll now see you've got a copy of your file called important.wcry. And this is now indicating that this is encrypted using a combination of RSA and AES algorithms to encrypt files. So they're quite strong. There are tools now, as we are a couple of years down the line, that could save you if you get lucky. But at the time, there was no chance. And we don't even believe that if you paid the ransom that they actually sent keys to you. It was kind of just you kind of pay the money and that's it. And they've taken you twice. They've stolen your money and encrypted your files. Here is a list of file extensions that it aimed for. As you can see, there's a ton. You've got your Word docs, your Excel docs, PowerPoints over here, SQL databases, Java files, MP4s, music stuff. You've also got your zip archives, any backup files, ISO images, a lot of very important stuff, as you could imagine. But within this was also a set of whitelisted folders. As you said earlier, it didn't want to brick your machine, so it whitelisted your program files, your program x86 files, of course, so that it wouldn't interrupt any crucial components on your computer that would end up stopping it from working normally. So lastly, of course, we've now spoken about how it would initial beacon out to that URL. It will then propagate, then hits you with ransomware, the kind of extensions that it looks at, and finally it's got to set up persistence, right? So if you restart your computer, it's still there. If you try and remove, it's still there. It used registry keys, a bit of a registry key change, as well as a scheduled task in order to set up persistence. And finally, it used Tor browsers, as we said earlier. It used a couple .onion sites for command and control, CNC servers, and that allowed the owners to track payments and track infected machines. You're connecting to this, you must be infected, and all that good stuff. Cool. So how was this stopped, right? It sounds quite lethal. Did we need a bat signal? Unfortunately, or fortunately, we didn't need a bat signal. It actually took a 22-year-old working from his bedroom in his parents' house to stop this. We have Marcus Hutchins, at the time only known by his handle Malware Tech. He's got a blog on Twitter and he's quite active in the community. But he was intrigued by the NHS, having a wormable payload in their network, that he requested from a friend to get a copy of the exe so he could reverse engineer it. And as we spoke about earlier, it wasn't a difficult reverse engineer. So as you can see in Guider, we've got over here the initial call to the URL. I mean, it's not obfuscated, it's right up there. So if you saw this, the first thing you do is, well, what is this? And start investigating that, especially as this is in the main function. So he decides to register the non-registered domain. Initially, he registers it so that he could track infections himself. He can see machines that are connecting to this domain, because that is the first thing it does, is connect to the domain. And this inadvertently turned out to be the kill switch. As we said earlier, as soon as it gets a response back from this URL, it doesn't execute. Bear in mind that if you were already infected, once he registered the domain, your files are still encrypted. This was only if you are about to be encrypted, about to be infected, and he had registered the domain at this point, it would then shut down and stop. Weird, right? Competing theories kind of exist as to why the perpetrators built in a hard-coded kill switch, but we'll never know unless the WannaCry creators of WannaCry explain their motivation. One possibility, the function was put in place in case they ever wanted to rein in the beast they created. Obviously, we saw 230,000 computers in a single day, so maybe this hard-coded was in order to rein it in if it ever just got too much for them. But by relying on a static discoverable address, whoever found it could easily just register the domain and trigger the kill switch. So Mark Hutchins himself, he theorizes that the hackers could have included this feature to shield the ransomware from analysis by security professionals. So researchers construct, these kind of environments called a sandbox. And what it does is it allows you to deploy malicious malware and run it and see how it interacts on a computer. And this is off the network and, in a little environment that you just delete when you're done or restore. Or so he reckons that the kill switch was put into place because in a lot of sandbox environments, they will then simulate connections. So your ransomware will be like, hey, can I connect to this? Can I connect to the CNC? And of course, you don't actually want it to connect to the CNC. So your sandbox then responds back with, yep, you can connect to it. And the ransomware thinks, or the malware thinks, okay, cool, let's execute. So they had done it the other way. They thought that if this domain wasn't registered and it got a response back, then it must be in a sandbox because we haven't registered the domain. Smart thinking, but inadvertently cost them. So Mark and his colleague Hankins, they kind of knew that if the kill switch went down, that WannaCry would pick up where it left, infecting thousands of machines every minute. So they understood that the domain had to stay up at all costs. And they did. They fended off several attacks from the original WannaCry operators, such as sending them tons of junk to try and knock the domain off. And luckily, these guys had done this stuff before and they were well versed and they were able to keep it online. And at some point, they even had to deal with law enforcement seizing 2 of their servers from a data center in France amid confusion that the domain was helping to spread WannaCry rather than preventing it. So yeah, he says he didn't sleep over a couple of weeks while he was working on making sure that the kill switch stayed up. So I bet that kill switch makes you feel a little bit safer. However, research by Sophos reveals that despite the availability of security patches and antivirus protection against WannaCry, there are more than 12,000 unique variants that exist in the world at the moment. And these newer variants are more effective and they can stay hidden for longer than the original WannaCry. And WannaCry is only one of many ransomware names in the wild. As you can see, I've got a list over here of some of your more common ransomware. WannaCry isn't even on this list, and bear in mind that WannaCry has over 12,000 unique strains that have been seen. So, I mean, all of these probably have hundreds, if not thousands of strains themselves. So ransomware is there, it's on the internet, watch what you download, and never do it on a corporate environment, please. So lastly, just a bit about mitigation. Nothing too much to say here apart from patch your machine. Microsoft released patches for the WannaCry exploit 2 months before WannaCry came around. They released patches for Eternal Blue 2 months prior, and yet it still infected so many machines because people did not patch their systems. If for some reason you're not able to patch your system for whatever reason, the next best thing would then be to obviously take it off the internet and disable SMB version 1, because Eternal Blue was reliant on SMB version 1. We're on version 3 now. Version 3 had all the security updates as well. So you want to disable SMB version 1 and also take it off the internet. And it should go without saying you should have a capable EDR or something to protect you.